Michael, a jobless young man from Seattle, Washington, was frantically searching for employment opportunities on Craigslist. One evening, he came across an unusual ad. Clown wanted for private performances. Generous payment. No experience required. Inquire to contact the Tree of God. Curiosity overcame disbelief, and Michael decided to respond. A few days later, he received a response from a mysterious organization called the Tree of God. He was asked to show up at an isolated location for an interview. The address led Michael to an old estate surrounded by ancient trees and intricate pathways. As he entered, he was greeted by a man dressed in a black suit and a clown mask, who went by the name The Guardian. The interview consisted of peculiar questions about his perception of the divine and his willingness to adhere to the organization's ideals. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, Michael was drawn to the promise of generous payment and accepted the clown job. He was provided with an elaborate costume, complete with a mask and makeup. His performances began at private parties and exclusive events. However, during a nighttime party at an isolated mansion, Michael started to notice something strange. Attendees wore dark clothing and whispered eerie phrases, evoking the image of a tree of God. In a corner, he saw the Guardian in a black robe, directing the ceremony with intense glances and enigmatic gestures. One night, after his performance, Michael followed the Guardian to a hidden place within the estate. He discovered a secret passage leading to a ceremonial room where the cult gathered. He witnessed a dark ritual, during which a figure in black sacrificed a cult member as part of a bizarre religious ceremony. Shaken and frightened, Michael realized he was involved in something far more sinister than he had ever imagined. He decided to escape, but the cult was well organized and had eyes everywhere. Nighttime pursuits, threatening messages, and unsettling symbols became part of his daily life. After weeks of terror, Michael managed to reach the police, but the cult seemed to have infiltrations everywhere. Investigators struggled to believe Michael's story, but when they discovered an underground worship place on the estate, they found chilling evidence of the cult's activities. Michael's story became an urban legend, with many people skeptical of its authenticity. However, the terror in his eyes and the deep scars on his soul tell a tale of an innocent job at turning into a living nightmare, with the Tree of God continuing to cast its sinister shadow. It was a cold November night, and John, a 25-year-old guy from Chicago, had just posted an ad on Craigslist looking for a travel companion for a horror-themed party in a nearby town. He received a response from a girl named Emily who seemed excited about the idea of sharing their passion for the occult and the unusual. After some message exchanges, they decided to meet at an old abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of the city. John was nervous, but also excited about the prospect of having a unique experience. When he arrived at the cemetery, he saw Emily in the distance, wrapped in a black cloak. She had dark hair and intense eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. The evening started pleasantly, with John and Emily exploring the paths between the tombstones, exchanging ghost stories and nervously laughing. Then, the temperature dropped, and the atmosphere became more tense. They heard strange noises coming from the depths of the cemetery, but attributed it all to stray cats or the wind whistling through the graves. Around midnight, they decided to venture into the heart of the cemetery, where the tombstones were older and less visible. It was at that moment that the lights on their phones suddenly went out. In complete darkness, John felt a cold hand gripping his. "Emily, is that you?" he asked, but received no response. He felt someone's presence around them but couldn't see anything. A faint light emanated from an open tomb, and they decided to approach. What they found was beyond imagination. Inside the tomb, there was a suffocating atmosphere, and an old, dusty book lay open on a pedestal. As they flipped through the pages, they discovered ancient texts and obscene symbols. As they read, the shadows around them seemed to come to life, and they heard unsettling whispers. Terrified, they tried to escape, but it seemed the cemetery had changed its shape. The paths they had previously walked now seemed labyrinthine, and every direction led them deeper into the realm of the unknown. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the shadows closed in. Finally, After an eternity, they reached a clearing in the center of the cemetery. There they found a hooded figure, motionless in the darkness. When the figure turned, it revealed an expressionless face. Emily whispered something incomprehensible and slowly walked away, disappearing into the darkness. John was left alone, surrounded by tomb-like silence. He managed to escape the cemetery, but his mind had changed. He had seen something he was never supposed to see, and since then, the shadows and whispers haunted him. He was convinced that the encounter with Emily had opened a door to something unimaginable, something that would never leave his soul at peace. Charlotte, a young woman from the small town of Silver Creek, Michigan, decided to shake up her life by seeking unusual connections. One day, she came across a Craigslist ad that caught her attention. Seeking participants for a nighttime exploration in an abandoned psychiatric hospital. Only brave souls need apply. Intrigued, she responded and was soon contacted by a man named Daniel. After a few messages, Daniel suggested a meeting in a deserted parking lot near the hospital. Driven by curiosity, Charlotte agreed. When she arrived, she found Daniel standing next to a car, with the psychiatric hospital looming imposingly in the background. Daniel, an individual with penetrating eyes and an enigmatic smile, warmly welcomed her. They entered the hospital through a semi-deteriorated door, and the air was charged with an eerie energy. The hallways were dark and marked with scratches on the walls, as if the screams of the past were still audible in the air. In an abandoned wing, they found a secret room that appeared to have been used for ritual ceremonies. At the center of the room lay an altar with a lifeless body, its face covered by a ritualistic mask. Horror and fear overwhelmed Charlotte. The corpse displayed signs of a ritual sacrifice, with precise cuts and blood-stained symbols carved into the skin. The scene was so surreal that for a moment, Charlotte wondered if she was trapped in a nightmare. With disturbing calmness, Daniel began to explain that the hospital had been frequented by a secret cult engaged in ancient rituals. The sacrificed body, according to him, was a necessary act to attain supernatural powers. Shocked and terrified, Charlotte tried to escape, but the hospital seemed to have a will of its own, with doors closing suddenly and shadows dancing eerily. In an attempt to find an escape route, Charlotte discovered a staircase leading to an underground crypt. There, she found more bodies, all arranged in a ritualistic manner. She realized that the cult had operated in secret for years, carrying out sacrifices for a dark cult. With courage, Charlotte finally managed to escape the hospital, but her life was changed forever. Terrified and traumatized, she tried to share her story with the police, but the hospital had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Daniel, the seemingly harmless guide, had vanished, leaving behind only unanswered questions. Charlotte now lives with the nightmare of that night, haunted by the horrors she experienced. She wonders if the cult will come after her again. But one thing is certain. Craigslist, an innocent means of connection, opened the doors to a dark and unsettling world that she would have preferred never to have known.